Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. The video opens with a powerful cinematic sequence, flickering candlelight in a medieval cathedral, the imposing figure of Henry VIII staring down a papal document, and a whispered voiceover declaring, "He broke from the Pope, dissolved centuries of tradition, and reshaped a kingdom." But was it really about faith, or just about a woman? This opening scene hooks the audience with dramatic visuals of church bells tolling, secret letters being passed in royal corridors, and Anne Boleyn's piercing gaze. The viewer is immediately drawn into a story not just of religious reform, but of ambition, passion, betrayal, and power. We begin by setting the stage in early 16th century England. The Roman Catholic Church dominates religious life, holding immense spiritual and political power. Henry VIII, the charismatic and ambitious second Tudor monarch, is initially a devout Catholic, even earning the title Fidei Defensor, Defender of the Faith, from the Pope for his writings against Martin Luther. But despite this pious appearance, Henry faces a personal and dynastic crisis. His marriage to Catherine of Aragon, though once politically advantageous, has failed to produce a male heir. With increasing anxiety about the Tudor succession, Henry becomes obsessed with Anne Boleyn, a sharp-witted courtier who refuses to be his mistress. Her refusal ignites a chain reaction that will alter the course of British and European history when the Pope refuses to annul Henry's marriage to Catherine, citing political pressure from her nephew Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor. Henry takes matters into his own hands. This is not just a king seeking a divorce, it is a challenge to the very structure of Christendom. Henry uses Parliament to pass a series of acts that cut off England from papal authority, most notably the Act of Supremacy in 1534, which declares the king the supreme head of the Church of England. With this, the English Reformation begins. Clerical loyalty is tested, and figures like Thomas More and Bishop John Fisher are executed for their refusal to accept the new order. Henry's dissolution of the monasteries from 1536 to 1541 becomes one of the most radical and controversial elements of the Reformation. Monasteries, long centers of wealth and Catholic tradition, are dismantled, their treasures confiscated, and their lands redistributed to loyal nobles. This not only weakens the Church's influence but strengthens Henry's control over both the land and the political elite. The social consequences are immense: monks and nuns displaced, the poor left without traditional support systems, and a flood of religious relics destroyed or sold. While many saw this as a bold move to purify religion and seize power from a corrupt church, others mourned the loss of centuries-old spiritual centers. Despite establishing the Church of England, Henry's personal religious beliefs remain largely Catholic in nature. Theologically, he opposes Lutheran doctrines and continues to enforce traditional practices. The Reformation under Henry is therefore uniquely English, not purely Protestant, not fully Catholic. It is more about asserting national sovereignty and monarchical control than about doctrinal purity. Yet the seeds of Protestantism are planted, especially under the influence of reformers like Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who plays a critical role in shaping the new liturgy and religious practices. Henry's marital saga continues to fuel political instability and religious tension. After executing Anne Boleyn in 1536, he marries 4 more times, producing only one male heir, Edward VI. Each marriage becomes a political move, tied to shifting alliances and theological implications. The king's actions create a ripple effect. Uprisings like the Pilgrimage of Grace emerge in response to his religious changes, and fear spreads across Europe about the rise of royal tyranny. Henry's later years are marked by paranoia, increasing cruelty, and a court filled with factional intrigue. The video then explores the long-term impact of Henry's decisions. Though he dies in 1547 believing he preserved a Catholic-style faith under royal authority, his break from Rome enables the Protestant Reformation to flourish under his son Edward and later Elizabeth I. The stage is set for a century of religious conflict, martyrdoms, and civil unrest. England's identity as a Protestant nation, independent from continental Catholic powers, is born from Henry's personal obsessions and political will. As the video nears its conclusion, we return to the central question posed at the start. Was this revolution about faith or about control? Through visuals of destroyed abbeys, portraits of Henry's 6 wives, and echoes of executions, the viewer is left with a haunting reflection. The English Reformation was not simply a theological shift, it was a royal revolution cloaked in the language of piety. And it all began with a king who defied the world to follow his heart, only to change the soul of a nation. As the camera sweeps across medieval cathedrals and lush countryside, we step back in time to understand England before the storm of Reformation. In the early 1500s, the Roman Catholic Church was not just a spiritual authority, it was the backbone of daily life. Monasteries dotted the land, serving not only as religious centers but also as hospitals, schools, and places of refuge. The clergy held vast tracts of land and enormous influence. The Pope in Rome was the ultimate authority, even above kings in certain matters. Life revolved around religious rituals, from birth to death, and the Church's grip extended deep into the political sphere, advising monarchs, shaping laws, and controlling public morality. But while England remained obedient to Rome, across the Channel, trouble was brewing. In 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a church door in Wittenberg, attacking the Church's corruptions. His defiance sparked the Protestant Reformation, which soon sent shockwaves across Europe. England would not remain untouched. At the heart of this transformation stood a young and idealistic Henry VIII. Early in his reign, Henry was a staunch Catholic and a committed theologian. He even wrote a treatise against Martin Luther, earning the title Defender of the Faith from Pope Leo X. Devout, intelligent, and politically astute, Henry seemed the model Christian king. He married Catherine of Aragon, a Spanish princess and the widow of his older brother, Arthur. Their union, approved by papal dispensation, was both diplomatic and deeply personal. Yet as years passed, their marriage produced only one surviving child, a daughter, Mary. The absence of a male heir troubled Henry deeply. The Tudor dynasty was young and fragile. A civil war had brought his father to power, and without a son, Henry feared England would descend into chaos after his death. Then came Anne Boleyn, a woman unlike any other at court. Charming, educated, ambitious, and politically savvy, and refused to be another royal mistress. Henry fell deeply in love, and his desire for her became inseparable from his dynastic obsession. The Pope's refusal to annul Henry's marriage to Catherine, due in part to pressure from her nephew, Emperor Charles V, sent the king into a rage. Denied by Rome, Henry turned inward. He began asserting royal authority over religious matters. Guided by advisors like Thomas Cromwell and Thomas Cranmer, he devised a solution: break with the papacy entirely. In 1534, Parliament passed the Act of Supremacy, declaring Henry the supreme head of the Church of England. This was not just a political maneuver, it was a seismic shift in religious life. The Pope no longer held sway in English affairs. Resistance was swift and brutal. Thomas More, once Henry's friend and Lord Chancellor, refused to recognize the king's supremacy and was executed. So were many others who remained loyal to Rome. The Reformation had begun not with sermons, but with executions. With religious authority now in his grasp, Henry moved quickly to dismantle one of the Church's most visible and powerful institutions, the monasteries. Between 1536 and 1541, under the direction of Thomas Cromwell, hundreds of monasteries were investigated, closed, and destroyed. Their vast wealth, gold, land, manuscripts, was seized by the crown. Much of this was sold off to nobles and gentry who now had a vested interest in supporting the new religious order. Altars were smashed. Relics were burned. Centuries of spiritual tradition were wiped away in a few short years. While Henry claimed this was to root out corruption, the dissolution was also a political strategy, to enrich the monarchy and weaken any lingering loyalty to Rome. For the common people, the effects were devastating. Communities lost their local institutions, the poor lost their only aid, and thousands of monks and nuns were cast out. The social fabric of England was torn, all in the name of reform, yet at the center of all this change stood Anne Boleyn. In 1533, she was crowned queen in a lavish ceremony. Soon after, she gave birth, not to a son, but to a daughter, Elizabeth. The disappointment was sharp, and Anne's enemies at court circled like vultures. Her sharp tongue, strong opinions, and failure to bear a male heir turned once loyal allies against her. By 1536, she was accused of adultery, incest, and treason, charges widely believed to be fabricated. Henry, seeking a way out, allowed her to be arrested, tried, and executed by beheading. Anne's fall was as swift as her rise. But her legacy was enormous. The child she bore would one day become Elizabeth I, and the revolution her marriage sparked would continue long after her death. As Henry continued to marry, 3 more times after, and the kingdom slipped further into religious chaos. Each new queen seemed to bring new shifts in policy and new power struggles. Reformers and conservatives battled for influence, and the people were caught in the middle. Some welcomed change. The Bible was now printed in English, and sermons began to replace Latin rituals. Others resisted fiercely. The Pilgrimage of Grace, a major uprising in the north, saw thousands protest the dissolution of monasteries and Henry's religious reforms. Though it was brutally suppressed, it showed the deep unease spreading through the country. By the final years of his reign, Henry's England was fundamentally transformed. Though he never fully embraced Protestant doctrine, his actions had opened the door to it. The Church of England was now a national institution, with the monarch at its head. Catholicism was no longer the state religion. Power had shifted from Rome to Westminster, and from abbots to bureaucrats. But the transition was anything but smooth. It would take decades of conflict, compromise, and bloodshed to settle the religious future of the kingdom. As the video approaches its end, we reflect on the lasting legacy of the English Reformation. It laid the foundation for a Protestant England. It gave rise to the Anglican Church. It set in motion the forces that would lead to civil war, Puritan revolutions, and eventual global colonization under a Protestant banner. Henry VIII himself remains one of history's most paradoxical figures, both destroyer and creator, tyrant and visionary. He shattered an ancient world and built a new one in its place. In the final scene, the narrator's voice returns over a slow montage: the ruins of a monastery, the crown of England, a Bible written in English, and the face of Elizabeth I staring resolutely into the future. Henry VIII didn't set out to start a reformation. But by the time he died, the England he left behind was no longer Catholic, no longer medieval, and no longer ruled by Rome. One man's personal obsession became a national revolution. The video closes with a prompt to the audience: was the English Reformation a spiritual awakening, or a political power grab? Let us know in the comments below.